Hey true crime fans! If you're into jaw-dropping stories about love gone wrong, twisted online romances, and shocking crimes that happen behind closed doors, you're in the right place. Hit that subscribe button and join us for new chilling true crime documentaries every single day. Trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next. Let's dive in. It was just past midnight in Seattle. A quiet street. A short walk home. Nothing out of the ordinary, until everything changed. Her name was Mia Zapata, lead singer of the Gits. A punk rock powerhouse with a voice that could shake a room and a spirit that wouldn't quit. But on July 7, 1993, Mia never made it home. What happened next would send shockwaves through the Seattle music scene and haunt her loved ones for a decade. A brutal crime. No witnesses. No suspects. No justice. For 10 long years, Mia's friends, her bandmates, and her family searched for answers, while her killer walked free. How could someone so full of life vanish in a matter of minutes, without anyone seeing a thing? And the bigger question, who was hiding in the shadows, and why did it take so long to bring them to light? Before she was a headline, before she became a symbol, Mia Zapata was simply Mia. Born August 25, 1965, in Louisville, Kentucky, she grew up surrounded by music. It was more than just a passion, it was part of her identity. By age 9, she was playing piano and guitar. By high school, her voice was already raw, expressive, bluesy in a way that felt older than her years. She had a gift. But it wasn't just talent. It was energy, defiance, emotion. She didn't perform music, she poured herself into it. In 1984, she enrolled at Antioch College in Ohio, an unconventional school known for its progressive culture. There, she met the people who would shape the next chapter of her life. 3 musicians who, like her, were searching for something more honest, more urgent. They moved to Seattle, a city on the brink of becoming the center of a global music explosion. The band was called the Gits. They were raw, but soulful, punk with purpose. Not polished for the mainstream, but perfect for the streets, for the underground. And at the front of it all was Mia. Her presence was electric, a storm of energy and vulnerability. She could scream and then whisper, rage and then break your heart. There was nothing artificial about her. No stage mask. No persona. Just truth, jagged and beautiful. The Gits played wherever they could, basements, backyards, dive bars. They built a following. Not just fans, but a family. And for women in the scene, especially in a space often dominated by men, Mia was more than a performer. She was a force of protection. Someone who looked out for others, who stood between danger and safety, who used her voice not just for herself, but for anyone who felt unheard. But beneath the energy, there was weariness too. The grind of life in the underground. Touring on a shoestring budget. Living in communal houses. Trying to break through without ever selling out. On July 6, 1993, Mia spent the evening with friends. She laughed. She rehearsed with her band. She made plans. There was nothing unusual, nothing to suggest anything was wrong. Just after midnight, she left a friend's apartment in the Central District of Seattle. Her home was only a short walk away. She never made it. The next morning, her body was discovered in a quiet neighborhood, the victim of a violent crime. The community was shaken to its core. How could this happen to someone so cherished, so central to the spirit of the city? Shock turned to grief. Grief turned to fear. And fear gave way to outrage. Because this wasn't just a murder. It was the silencing of a voice that had come to mean something to so many. But no one had seen it happen. There were no clear witnesses. No clear answers. And as detectives scrambled for leads, a haunting question began to grow louder. Who did this? And how had they disappeared without a trace? The night of July 6, 1993, had all the signs of something ordinary. Mia Zapata was rehearsing with her band, the Gits. The energy was high. They were preparing for a tour that could take them to the next level, More venues, more exposure, and maybe even a major label deal. After rehearsal, Mia visited a friend in Seattle's Capitol Hill neighborhood, a place she knew well. For years, these streets had been hers. Punk shows, late-night walks, music, friendships, they were all woven into the sidewalks and storefronts. She left the apartment sometime after midnight. No one remembers the exact time. It was quiet. Still, she wasn't drunk. She wasn't in distress. She didn't call a cab or ask for a ride. She had made that walk dozens of times, from friends' places to her home near 24th Avenue South. It was about a mile away. What happened in that stretch of city, in that small space between one door and another, remains one of Seattle's darkest unanswered questions. The last person to see Mia alive wasn't a stranger. It was a friend. Someone she trusted. There were no arguments. No threats. Just a goodbye. At some point on that walk home, she crossed paths with a killer. The details of what happened next are painful, and yet, strangely absent. There were no known eyewitnesses. No shouts reported. No signs of an ongoing disturbance. What we do know is that Mia never made it to her front door. Her body was found at around 3:30 a.m. by a passerby near 24th Avenue South and South Washington Street, just blocks from her house. She was lying on the grass in front of a house. At first glance, it wasn't immediately clear what had happened. There was no blood visible. No shattered glass. Nothing to alert the casual eye to the horror that had unfolded just hours before. But something was off. She wasn't breathing. Her posture was unnatural. Her clothing disheveled. Emergency responders were called. Police arrived on the scene quickly. And soon, the calm of that night gave way to the first wave of realization. Mia Zapata was dead. The initial theories varied. Could it have been a drug overdose? A collapse from natural causes? Police were cautious. But when the medical examiner took a closer look, the truth was unavoidable. Mia had been attacked. Violently. And based on early estimates, it had happened only hours earlier. Seattle detectives launched a full investigation. They canvassed the neighborhood, knocked on doors, and asked for witnesses. But no one had seen a thing. The street where she was found wasn't known for crime. It was residential, a place where porch lights flickered and neighbors watered their lawns. But in the silence of early morning, a life had been taken, and no one had noticed. The crime scene yielded few clues. There were no fingerprints. No clear DNA sample. Her personal belongings, including her wallet and jewelry, were still with her, ruling out robbery. But her Walkman was missing. A small detail. Maybe insignificant. Maybe not. Investigators logged it, hoping it might one day lead somewhere. Back in the Capitol Hill neighborhood, word of Mia's death spread rapidly. Musicians, bartenders, activists, writers. Everyone who had crossed paths with her was stunned. Grief and confusion collided. Who would do this? She was more than just a singer. She was a friend, a protector, a leader. And now she was gone. The news made headlines. Her photograph appeared in local newspapers. Posters went up across the city, urging anyone with information to come forward. But no tips led anywhere. No one stepped forward. No one confessed. It was as if the killer had vanished into thin air. And for Mia's friends, that was the hardest part. The randomness of it all. The senselessness. She hadn't been lured into a trap. She hadn't been on a dangerous mission. She had just walked home. A few blocks. The time from when she was last seen to when she was found was short. But within that short window, something monstrous had occurred. Her bandmates were devastated. In interviews, they struggled to find words. How do you describe the void left by someone who lived so loudly? In the weeks that followed, Seattle's music scene transformed into a grieving community. Benefit concerts were held. Vigils lit up the streets. Bands played in Mia's honor, not just to remember her, but to demand justice. But justice wasn't coming. Not yet. For investigators, there was no suspect. No motive. No clear evidence. No reason. And for those who loved her, there was only one question. Mia's body was found hours later, but who could have done this? The morning after Mia Zapata was found, the Seattle Police Department launched a formal homicide investigation. But from the beginning, the case was clouded with uncertainty. There were no witnesses, no surveillance cameras, no phone footage. No neighbors recalled hearing a struggle or seeing anyone suspicious. And for detectives, that silence was a problem. Because the longer a crime like this goes unsolved, the harder it becomes to find the truth. Investigators canvassed the area where Mia's body was found. They knocked on doors, retraced her likely path, and combed through alleyways and nearby lots. They interviewed anyone who had seen her that night, bandmates, friends, neighbors. But no one had seen what happened between the time Mia left that Capitol Hill apartment and the moment she was found hours later, just 1 mile away. The investigation faced another problem. There was no clear motive. Mia's wallet and ID were still on her. Her jewelry hadn't been taken. There were no signs of a robbery gone wrong. Her Walkman was missing, but that seemed oddly insignificant, like a distraction instead of a clue. So police began to widen the search. They looked into known offenders in the area, sex crimes databases, recently released inmates, drifters, street-level offenders. But nothing fit. Back at the station, detectives ran the physical evidence through the limited forensics technology available at the time. In 1993, DNA science was still in its early stages, and while they were able to collect biological evidence, they couldn't match it to anyone. The National DNA Database was barely operational, and the profile they had led nowhere. Detectives pressed on. They consulted the FBI, criminal profilers, psychologists, but each theory ran into the same wall: too few clues, too little evidence. Frustration began to mount. Investigators followed dozens of tips, each one promising, each one collapsing under scrutiny. Some speculated that it may have been someone in the local scene. Others wondered if Mia had been targeted by a stranger, a transient passing through. But none of the leads went anywhere. No suspects were arrested. No names made public. Meanwhile, Mia's friends were spiraling. Some blamed themselves for letting her walk alone. Others turned their grief into action, organizing fundraisers, setting up anonymous tip lines, launching a nonprofit in her name. Her bandmates were devastated. They canceled the tour. Eventually, the Gits disbanded altogether. The community was reeling. And yet, the wider public outside of Seattle's music scene was barely paying attention. And so Mia's case faded from the headlines, but not from memory. Every few months, a detective would revisit the file, check for new evidence, run another test. But the answers stayed hidden. Years passed. Seattle changed. The music scene evolved. But the pain around Mia's death remained raw. Then, nearly a decade later, the silence finally cracked. By the early 2000s, forensic science had leaped forward. DNA testing was faster, more precise. And most importantly, the National CODIS database was now populated with samples from offenders across the country. In 2001, cold case detectives decided to retest the evidence from Mia's case. It was a long shot. But what they found was a breakthrough. A DNA profile, pulled from the original crime scene, was now advanced enough to be matched in the system. And in 2003, that match came through. It belonged to a man with no known connection to Mia. Someone who hadn't even lived in Seattle at the time of the murder. A complete stranger. But before detectives could act, they had to be sure. They watched, investigated, followed, and finally, collected a second DNA sample to confirm the match. And it matched. But the name? It wasn't familiar. He wasn't a known suspect. He wasn't part of the scene. He had slipped through the cracks for years. And now, police were ready to make an arrest. After 10 years of silence, they finally had a name. But before we learn who he was, we have to ask, How did he stay hidden for so long? By the early 2000s, many feared Mia Zapata's case would remain a cold file forever. Another name lost to silence, her killers still free. But in the background, something had changed. Technology had evolved. DNA profiling was now sharper, faster, and more powerful than ever before. And in 2001, nearly a decade after Mia's murder, cold case detectives in Seattle made a decision to run the evidence again. Just one more time. What they didn't expect was a match. The DNA from Mia's case hit in the national database, a match to a man who had never once been considered a suspect. His name was Jesus Mesquia, a Cuban-born fisherman who had lived briefly in Seattle in the early 90s. He had a history of violence against women, including arrests in other states. But no one had ever linked him to Mia. And now, it was too late to question whether he knew her. Because the science said everything. The DNA pulled from the original crime scene matched Mesquia's profile with statistical certainty. Investigators didn't just take the computer's word for it. They watched him, collected a second DNA sample, sent it for comparison. It matched again. It had taken 10 years, but finally they had found him. By then, Mesquia was living in the Florida Keys. He had a wife, a young child. He was working, fishing, living quietly. A man who looked like any other, but behind that life was a hidden truth. The man they least suspected had been hiding in plain sight. In January of 2003, detectives made their move. Jesus Mesquia was arrested and extradited to Seattle. The news shocked many. He wasn't part of the music scene. He had no connection to Mia's friends. He had lived in Seattle for only a brief time, during which he had encountered her, somewhere, somehow. He denied everything, pleaded not guilty. But science had done what human memory couldn't. The trial began in March 2004. Mia's friends and family packed the courtroom. Some had aged 10 years waiting for this day. Others had flown across the country just to be there. There was no need for speculation. No need for theories. The prosecution focused on the facts. DNA evidence recovered from Mia's body and clothing. DNA that could only belong to one person. The defense questioned the strength of the timeline. They offered no alternate suspect. No real alibi. But they tried to chip away at the chain of custody, the reliability of memory, the absence of a known relationship between Mia and the accused. It wasn't enough. The jury deliberated for just over a day. On March 25, 2004, they returned a verdict, guilty on charges of first-degree murder and rape. Jesus Mesquia was sentenced to 36 years in prison, the maximum allowed under the law at the time. For Mia's family, it was a moment both heartbreaking and healing. Her mother said, "This won't bring Mia back. But it means something. It means he can't hurt anyone else." For her bandmates, the trial was a painful but necessary ending to a story that had haunted them for a decade. "We finally know," one of them said. "And now we can begin to grieve properly." The Seattle community, too, let out a collective breath. After years of candlelight vigils, tribute concerts, flyers, and cold silence, they had an answer. But it wasn't closure. Not really. Because nothing could bring back the energy Mia brought into a room. Her laughter, her voice, her fight. Justice had come slowly, and only because the science had caught up with the crime. For many watching the case, one question lingered: how many other victims were still waiting for that same match? How many lives had been taken by men like Mesquia? Men who vanished into normalcy, into families, into work, until a test uncovered who they really were. In 2021, Jesus Mesquia died in prison. He never confessed. He never explained why he targeted Mia. He never showed remorse. But the silence he left behind could no longer hide the truth. And for everyone who knew her, everyone who loved her, one thing became clear. The music Mia Zapata made, and the life she lived, would never be forgotten. The loss of Mia Zapata sent shockwaves far beyond the streets of Seattle. For her family, the pain was immeasurable. a life full of promise, extinguished too soon. Yet, even in their grief, they chose to channel their sorrow into action. Mia's parents became advocates, speaking openly about the need to support victims of violence and to improve systems that help bring perpetrators to justice. Her death exposed the vulnerabilities women faced, not just in dangerous parts of town, but in places they thought were familiar and safe. Within Seattle's punk and broader music community, Mia's absence was deeply felt. She had been a beacon of passion, courage, and creativity, a figure who inspired many with her fiery spirit and unwavering dedication to her art. Benefit concerts, memorial shows, and tribute albums were organized year after year, serving as both remembrance and a call to action. Through these gatherings, musicians, friends, and fans honored her legacy, reminding the world that while Mia's voice was silenced, her spirit remained unbroken. Her story also became a catalyst for change within law enforcement. The challenges detectives faced during the initial investigation, limited forensic tools, lack of leads, and a slow-moving justice system, highlighted the need for improved methods and greater resources. Seattle police invested in better evidence preservation, expanded cold case units, and embraced the revolutionary advances in DNA technology that ultimately solved Mia's case. This progress underscored a vital truth. Even when justice seems impossible, perseverance and innovation can bring answers, no matter how many years pass. Mia's case also sparked important conversations around victim advocacy, community responsibility, and the culture of violence that too often surrounds women. Her death was not just an isolated tragedy, it was part of a broader societal issue, one that calls on each of us to listen, to act, and to protect. Friends who knew Mia well have said that she was more than a talented singer, she was a fighter, a protector of the marginalized, someone who gave voice to the unheard. One close friend reflected, "Mia was fire. She burned bright, and even now, that fire lights the way for those who follow." Her legacy lives on not only through the music she left behind but in the ongoing fight for justice and safety for all. As you watch, ask yourself, how can we better protect those around us from violence? What role do communities play in ensuring safety and justice? Today, Mia Zapata's story stands as a reminder, a powerful, somber call to vigilance. It reminds us that violence can happen anywhere, to anyone, but also that through community, persistence, and love, the silence can be broken. It challenges us to keep pushing for better protections, for survivors' voices to be heard, and for justice to be swift and sure. What can each of us do to be part of that change? As we close this story, we ask you to reflect deeply. What lessons does Mia's life and death teach us? How can we honor her memory by building a safer world? Her voice may have been silenced on that summer night in 1993, but the echo of her courage and spirit will never fade. Mia Zapata is gone, but she is never forgotten.